Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Ivana Harinkyu if you're new here, and if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is Tuesday, January the 11th. I think it was a late night for many of us. Some of you may just be kind of getting out of bed and getting onto your day after that game last night. So again, we thank you for joining us here today. Now, it is a day, though, that's important to get out of bed because this is the day where the Alabama legislative session starts. Now, again, this is a little earlier than maybe you're used to seeing it. But again, first day of legislative session, a lot of big things coming up this year on the agenda. And remember, all of the people in the Alabama legislature are up for election this year in the midterms that we keep referring to as midterms. For them, this is their big year. So today I am joined by columnist Dana Hall McCain. Dana is our columnist who writes about faith, culture, and politics. And she has also served on the national level of the Southern Baptist Convention. So Dana, thank you for joining us today. And I really want to talk about a column that you wrote, I believe it was yesterday. And this was about Mo Brooks and Roy Moore in something here that you believe that Mo Brooks probably shouldn't be going around bragging about.
Yeah, indeed. I was shocked and a little bit taken aback when Mo started saying at repeated campaign stops that he, quote unquote, was the only candidate in this race who voted against Doug Jones in 2017. And of course, he's trying to push that as sort of a litmus test for party loyalty. But his big problem is that to have voted against Doug Jones in 2017, one has to have voted for Roy Moore. And I think a lot of people on both sides of the aisle in the state of Alabama look back on Roy Moore's candidacy for the Senate and that whole episode in 2017 as one of the darkest hours in Alabama politics, where we were faced with, allegations of misconduct that were very unsettling to people from all walks of life. And it forced Alabama Republicans to make really difficult decisions about what they would prioritize when they walked into that voting booth. And of course, we know the outcome. Many of them decided that their own personal conscience would not allow them to cast a vote for Roy Moore.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't turn out for him as they normally would have in the general election, and Doug Jones prevailed. So it's interesting to me that Mo would go back to that well when that is just a negative chapter in Alabama GOP history for so many of us.
Well, and we know if anybody needs a quick look back and a quick recap, we know that several women came forward in that 2016-2017 period ahead of this special election between Roy Moore and Doug Jones to allege that Roy Moore had several inappropriate relationships and inappropriate liking, I believe, as you say in your column, for young women, often minors, including one woman who was 14 at the time of what she said was Roy Moore's sexual interest and romantic interest in her. So we went through that 2016, 2017. And that was something that came out again, pretty much right before that special election that really took a lot of people who maybe were GOP voters in this state, had to look at themselves, look at who was on that ballot and say, is this somebody I can vote for? Now, you make a good, I think it's an interesting point in your column of saying, could not, people like yourself, you said, I believe, I'm looking for the quote here, conservatives who vote for biblical reasons, that you couldn't vote for Doug Jones because of his stance on abortion. You also couldn't vote for Roy Moore because of your own conscience. So that really put GOP voters in a very peculiar spot, especially because we know Roy Moore would not drop out of the race.
That's right. And so, when Mo Brooks wants to talk about party loyalty, I find it interesting that the most disloyal person to the Alabama Republican Party in 2017 was Roy Moore himself. Because once his candidacy was so damaged, if he had been concerned about helping our party save a very crucial seat in the United States Senate, he should have stepped down and would have allowed the party to run almost anyone without a major credibility problem in that slot. And with the heavily Republican lean of the demographics of this state, they most likely would have prevailed over Doug Jones. But Roy Moore did not care for what the party needed or for what the state needed. He wanted to protect his own personal interests. So when we talk about loyalty, again, I think invoking the name of Roy Moore is really an interesting way to go about that, for sure. It was a horrible moment for so many of us, and it sparked interesting, intense conversations around tables all over the state among families who were, you know, all Republicans, but had different approaches to how to deal with that crisis point. But I think what we saw, and it broke out, in my opinion, largely along generational lines. We saw a lot of older traditional Republicans say, well, we just have no choice but to vote for our party's candidate. And you saw a lot of millennial Republicans and Gen Z, Gen Y Republicans say, you know what? I don't think so. I don't want my party to be this in the future. So I'm going to protest this whole situation and demand better from my party. Yes, I want conservative ideals promoted in the public square. I want conservative policies passed in the halls of Congress, but I'm not willing to suborn my ethics and my sense of morality to get there. I'm willing to play a longer game and try to heal our party as we go forward.
You mentioned about this party loyalty that it seems like Mo Brooks is really trying to run this Senate campaign on in bringing up. He doesn't even really say he voted for Roy Moore. He says he voted against Doug Jones, which, as you say, is just kind of a way to get around actually saying those words, getting that elephant in the room here. But
Right.
you talk about party loyalty. So I want to know, in your opinion, and also in some of the opinions of other Republicans, especially Republican strategists that you speak with or other conservative voters, do you believe these people think that party loyalty means you need to vote for somebody who was accused of essentially sexual harassment of a minor, or among other things, over just voting for somebody who, because they have a D next to their name or an I next to their name? Are you not a good Republican if you vote for Doug Jones, if you vote for somebody who doesn't have these very questionable marks against their character?
Yeah, if you polled 100 Republican voters in the state on that question, excuse me, you would get a whole spectrum of answers. You would find some who would say there's absolutely no acceptable answer other than supporting your party's candidate, win, lose, or draw. I don't care if he's Attila the Hun. You go in that booth and you vote for him, and you don't ask questions. And then there are other people who say, well, this type of misconduct would be a bridge too far for me. And then another pool who would say, I don't even need it to look that unethical or distasteful. I would abandon a candidate over this type of offense. And on and on and on. And some who would say, because you remember in 2017, there was a grassroots organization that sprang up in the state called Republicans for Doug Jones. And they were people who were committed, lifelong Republican voters who were so turned off by Roy Moore's behavior that they believed, and those allegations that they believed to be truly credible, given the number of them and the way that they were corroborated by so many friends and family of these women. They were more than comfortable saying, in this moment, I will definitely vote for a Democrat with a clear conscience, even if I disagree with him on some issues. I personally sort of landed in one of those middle zones. I couldn't get my head around voting for a candidate who I knew would support abortion policies that are a big moral trigger for me. And so I sort of registered my vote as a signal and a protest to my own party that we've got to do better in our own primaries, vetting our own candidates, and promoting and electing and putting in these general elections men and women who are men and women of character, not just men and women who can spout off the right talking points. I want leaders with character, and the only way you get leaders with character is by demanding them at the ballot box. And so I think that's what a lot of Republican voters did at the end of the day there.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, about demanding these leaders, because at the end of the day, we can all complain about our politicians, right? But we are the people who put them there. We are the people who put them in office. So we know that we have a lot of big races coming up, including a race for that Senate seat. Has been held by Senator Shelby, who has been in the Senate for many of us for our lifetimes, right? For quite a long time. He is stepping down, leaving a vacant slot here. We have a big race coming. That is where these comments from Representative Mo Brooks come from in this campaign of saying, look, this is why you should vote for me. I am such a loyal Republican. I didn't vote for Doug Jones, right? That is something that is maybe on a list of things for advertising yourself for a Senate seat that most people probably wouldn't pick, right?
Yep.
Why is he going for that one? Why can't he point to anything else in his campaign to say, this is why you should vote for me? Why is he going to something that, as you mentioned in your column, that many conservatives would really like to forget?
I think to me and to a lot of political strategists that I've talked to in recent months, it's a clear sign that the Mo Brooks campaign is struggling. He started out by many measures almost as an incumbent in this race based on his name recognition statewide. He had run a statewide campaign before. So he came out of the gate with that name recognition advantage, and then added to that the endorsement of former President Donald Trump, which still carries a lot of weight in the state of Alabama. So many people thought, based on those two factors alone, that he would be unbeatable in this race. And here we are just a few short months later, and the polling data tells a totally different story. We see several polls where Republican Katie Britt is in a dead even horse race with him, or even out ahead in some polls. And then Mike Durant enters the race, who lives in Mo's own district, and has a lot of the same appeal as a veteran and as a person who appeals to certain demographics within the Alabama GOP. He kind of cuts into Mo's base in some serious ways, and probably cuts into Mo's fundraising base in North Alabama in some significant ways. And so it's going to be really difficult for Mo to overcome, the fundraising prowess of Britt and the fundraising prowess of Durant, and the very sort of marketable, hopeful stories that those two candidates bring to this race. They're both people with almost no skeletons in their closet that anyone could ever find. You just got a wife and a mom who works really hard and has for 20 years and has been extraordinarily effective in everything that she's ever touched. And you've got, a veteran who's also been a very successful businessman, who also has a tremendous amount of credibility with his base. So for Mo to separate himself, he would need to be able to point to a record of really having hit some balls over the wall in the United States Congress. And his record as the representative from his district of Alabama is just not that impressive. You don't see a lot of huge bills passed that were brought to the table and sponsored by Mo Brooks. So I think he's just struggling. He's struggling, and I don't think they really counted on the Britt campaign being able to fundraise the way it has. I don't think they counted on Katie Britt's tenacity with retail politics. The number of counties and cities that she has visited in the last 6 months, getting out there and actually meeting Alabama voters and letting them hear personally from her, has made a huge difference in this race. I think she's been willing to do the work. And Durant has started to amp up his efforts in his own way. So I think there's a little bit of panic in the Brooks camp. And, if I were a political strategist charged with advising them, I would say it probably is time to be very concerned, because you've got some people really on your heels. Now, that said, Club for Growth, who is always kind of an 800-pound gorilla out-of-state PAC, is going to support Mo Brooks in this race. And I'm hearing through the grapevine that they're, doing a major ad buy right now in some Alabama media markets on his behalf. So you will start to see Club for Growth get out there with ads trying to trash these two challengers to Brooks' campaign. And so that will probably change the calculus a little bit. But I hope Alabama voters will be savvy enough to know that, some guys from Chicago really shouldn't be picking Alabama's next senator, and we'll sort of take those ads with a grain of salt.
All of that was really insightful, Dana. You mentioned something about an out-of-state PAC coming in, and I think you just said, why would Alabama voters listen to people from out of state about who to vote for? And that goes both ways, right? We hear that so many times on the Democratic side of the aisle about big name voters, about celebrities who endorse different candidates. So it really does go both ways. And you also mentioned something that I think we need to reiterate so it doesn't get lost. Mo going to this line of "I voted against Doug Jones" comes with these two very powerful challengers of Katie Britt and Mike Durant. We know Mike Durant, very distinguished veteran up in North Alabama, who lives rather in North Alabama now. Katie Britt, basically the right-hand person of Senator Shelby for a long time. And you mentioned her visiting all of these counties. We know whose playbook that's a page out of, right? That is a page out of Senator Shelby's playbook. That is something that really garnered him a lot of appeal with Alabama voters, how he always visited places. He was very approachable. That is what voters really liked about him. So I think it's interesting you mentioned that Mo came into this race kind of feeling like an incumbent and maybe expecting to be treated like an incumbent. And then he gets these challengers that are a little bit more powerful than he maybe imagined. And he said, whoa, I got to point to something. And right now we have many controversial comments that people see as controversial, I think it's fair to say. We also, that Mo has made just over the years. We have the different clips that we have all seen about his involvement on January 6th, about speeches he made before things got very out of hand at the U.S. Capitol. We see just his entire career. As you said, there's not some huge piece of legislation with his name on it. So when you go down the list of things to point to, maybe that's something he's going to hang his hat on, just being very loyal to the Republican Party and also having that endorsement from former President Donald Trump.
I think there are two kinds of political candidates in this day and age, and one appeals to me and one absolutely does not. We've got microphone and camera chasers who are big on messaging and short on actual production in their roles in either the legislature or the Congress. And then we have people who don't chase a news hit every day, but who put their heads down and go to work and actually produce results for the people they represent. That's the kind of leader I'm looking to send to the United States Senate in 2022. Alabama cannot afford to waste a crucial Senate seat on someone who is more interested in getting the next hit on Newsmax or OAN or Fox News or wherever versus actually looking out for the economic development of Alabama, looking out for the protection of the kinds of values in terms of cultural, political action that Alabama people would want to see. I don't need somebody with a big megaphone. I need somebody with biceps who can get it done. So that's what I'll be looking for in this race. And I think that, you know, in terms of the candidates that we have before us now, you know, there are people who have very strong cases to make that they have more demonstrable history of having produced results in the roles that they play. I mean, you look at what Katie Britt accomplished at the Business Council of Alabama when she came home from DC after serving Senator Shelby, like you alluded to earlier. She came home and took over the BCA and did a lot of really good work for Alabama business at the BCA. Things like that she can point to, and things in his own professional life that Mike Durant can point to that I don't see Mo Brooks able to point to necessarily. So it'll be interesting. Maybe he will reach into the hat and pull out a rabbit, but we haven't seen it yet.
We know primaries coming up in May, kind of at the start of summer. So it is going to be an interesting winter, I guess, rest of the winter and spring here. Look at that race. I had so many things I wanted to talk with you about, Dana. I know we're running out of time, but I do have to ask you before we go. Today is the start of the Alabama legislative session. What are your big picture thoughts there on what you're hoping to see come out of the legislature, what you're hoping for them to focus on?
Well, it's a really unique year in that we have more money to allocate and work with than ever before in history. It's because, you know, our in-state revenues were up in 2021, filling our coffers with more dollars. And then we also have all of this federal money that came our way in terms of COVID-related relief. And so I think it's going to be a really crucial moment for the Alabama legislature to make the most of this opportunity, this windfall of cash that will allow us to shore up some rainy day funds that will need to be protected for the future, and to spend this money in ways that are true investment, not just cash out the door that never produces anything for the state of Alabama. Excuse me. One way, sorry, I'm still getting over a cold. One way that I think that the Alabama legislature can really do good things for our state going forward with this extraordinary opportunity and the amount of money that they have in terms of federal dollars is to double down on broadband investment in the state of Alabama. Right now in this state, we have a tale of two cities. You know, suburban and urban Alabamians have so much more access to business opportunity, to education, to health care. And if we would enable rural Alabamians to have access to affordable, reliable, fast broadband, it would open up opportunity for them in ways that are absolutely crucial and absolutely needed. So this is an opportunity because enhancing our broadband capability is a very expensive endeavor. There's no way around that, but it has to be done, I think, and it will bear fruit. It will create return on investment for our state that makes so much sense and keeps all Alabamians and their needs in view. So I hope to see them really focus on wise investment in that area in 2022.
Well, we know broadband is a huge issue. It's been one, but it really came to the attention of more Alabamians, especially in 2020, when we saw so many school children who were having to go virtual with their classes and having to drive to find a school bus that had internet access and sit outside of a school bus to do their homework because they didn't have that internet at home. I
talked to so many people because I work out of Dothan, Alabama, which is, it's a well-developed infrastructure in and around Dothan proper. But just a few miles in any direction, we have rural areas, friends and neighbors who may work in Dothan, but they may live in Henry County. And when Alabama colleges and schools dismissed and went virtual because of COVID in the spring of 2020, I heard so many stories from families whose children were having to drive 15 miles to a McDonald's and sit in the parking lot of the McDonald's to do their university level work for Auburn or Alabama and to stay current with their academic process because it was absolutely impossible for them to do from home. That's just unacceptable. That's unacceptable. And then, like you say, for K through 12 students as well, even within cities, in some cases, they were having to park these hotspot buses around and create places where a mom, after working all day and doing whatever else she has to do, has to put the kids in the car and go sit parked by a random school bus to enable them to keep up with their education. So we can do better and we must do better. And 2022 and this federal money represents an opportunity to do better. So I hope we do it.
Well, I think that one thing everybody on any side of the aisle you can find in Alabama can agree that there's a lot to be done in a lot of different places and that there is no shortage of issues for the legislature to deal with this session. So they got a big job ahead of them. And as you mentioned, there will be a lot to watch, a lot to come out of this session. So Dana, I know you're going to keep us up to date with your columns on AL.com. Again, I know you write about faith, conservative issues, and statewide politics. I do want to read one quick line before I let you go that we have seen at the bottom of your column yesterday. And you say, again, what you write about, and you say, she has a very low tolerance for sexual misconduct involving grown men, teen girls, and a long memory. So Dana, with that, I will let you go. Thank you so much for your insight here. And we look forward to having you back.
Thanks, Ivana.
Everybody watching, thank you so much. We will see you tomorrow.